If you've been following the Resident Evil series for decades, you know that Capcom loves to leave certain things ambiguous, especially when it comes to relationships between characters. Leon S. Kennedy is one of the most iconic characters in the franchise. He's been through Raccoon City, bioterror outbreaks across the world, and decades of government service. But one question that fans keep coming back to is this: if Leon ever settled down, who would he actually marry? There are a few obvious candidates that the community likes to talk about. Some make sense at first glance, others less so when you really look at the history of the series. So today on this channel, where we focus exclusively on Resident Evil lore analysis and speculation, we're going to go through the possibilities and try to answer the question: who is the most realistic candidate to become Leon Kennedy's wife? The obvious candidate are Ada Wong. Let's get the obvious one out of the way first. Ada Wong. For many fans, Ada is the default answer. It's Leon's love interest throughout the series, and the relationship between them has been teased since Resident Evil 2. But when you actually think about it, Ada is also the least likely long-term option. Ada is fundamentally a rogue agent. She operates in morally grey territory, sometimes even outright working for organizations that Leon himself would be tasked with stopping. Leon is a government agent whose job is literally to hunt people like Ada. That creates a permanent contradiction. Could they have had encounters over the decades? Possibly. Off-screen relationships, brief flings, the series leaves room for interpretation. But a stable, long-term relationship, a marriage, that's much harder to imagine. Ada represents the dangerous attraction trope. This is the mysterious bad girl, the kind of character that works perfectly in a spy thriller dynamic, but not necessarily in a long-term partnership. In other words, Ada is the one Leon can't have, not the one he builds a life with. The other candidates fans mention, there are a few other characters that fans occasionally bring up, right? Claire Redfield. Another name that sometimes comes up in fan discussions is Claire Redfield. Claire and Leon met during the events of Resident Evil 2, and they went through the Raccoon City outbreak together. Because of that shared experience, some fans naturally imagine that the two could eventually become a couple. However, when you look at the broader Resident Evil timeline, Claire and Leon actually spent very little time together after Raccoon City. Claire's path takes her in a different direction. She becomes deeply involved with humanitarian work and eventually joins TerraSave, focusing on helping victims of bioterrorism rather than fighting outbreaks directly. Leon, on the other hand, goes down the path of becoming a government agent, constantly deployed on dangerous missions around the world. So while they clearly respect each other and share an important history, their lives move in very different directions. Claire also tends to have strong chemistry with other characters, for example Moira Burton, which further reinforces the idea that Claire's story operates somewhat separately from Leon's. Because of that, Claire doesn't really feel like a long-term romantic candidate for Leon, even though the fandom occasionally likes to imagine that possibility. Ashley Graham. Ashley is another name that sometimes comes up because of Resident Evil 4, but when you look at their dynamic, their relationship is very clearly protector and rescued civilian. Ashley was much younger and came across like a sheltered college student who suddenly got thrown into a nightmare scenario. Leon, on the other hand, is extremely disciplined and serious. Personality-wise, they just don't align very well. Ashley is someone Leon saves, not someone who feels like a long-term partner. Helena Harper from RE6 is another possible candidate. But Helena is essentially a one-game character in Leon's story. They develop mutual respect during the events of RE6, and she probably becomes a trusted ally or contact afterward. But nothing in their interactions suggests a deep personal bond that would evolve into marriage. Ingrid Hannigan. Hannigan is another character people occasionally mention. She's competent, professional, and clearly someone Leon trusts. But again, the relationship feels much more like professional colleagues than anything else. She's part of Leon's support system, not someone the story ever hints. Not someone the story ever hints at romantically. The one candidate that actually makes sense, Sherry Birkin. Now let's talk about the character who actually makes the most sense when you look at the timeline. Sherry Birkin. At first, this idea might feel strange to some fans. mainly because our first memory of Sherry is from RE2, where she's just a child. But remember, almost 3 decades have passed since Raccoon City. Sherry grew up, and more importantly, Sherry and Leon have a shared history that no other characters have with him. After the events of RE2, Leon was directly involved in helping Sherry survive and eventually become part of the government system. Sherry later becomes an agent herself, meaning she and Leon end up working in the same world for years. They share similar experiences, similar enemies, similar responsibilities, and decades of overlapping history. That kind of shared background is actually what tends to build the strongest long-term relationships. The generational difference is another thing people bring up. Leon is about 9 years older than Sherry, but in adult terms, that's not particularly unusual. When both people are in their late 30s or 40s, a 9-year difference is not that significant. In fact, in many real-world relationships, the age difference is often larger. The only reason it feels strange is because we still associate Sherry with the child version from RE2, but the timeline of Resident Evil has moved forward significantly. Personality compatibility, there's a strong such personality match between Sherry. Leon is calm, measured, and disciplined. Sherry grew up in extremely difficult circumstances, lost her parents, and had to mature very quickly. She's intelligent, serious, and capable. Exactly the kind of personality that would realistically connect with someone like Leon. Unlike some other characters, the relationship will be built on trust, shared experience, and long-term familiarity, and those are exactly the kinds of foundations that tend to create lasting relationships. What we don't know about Leon after RE6 is a lot. Another interesting factor is that we actually don't know very much about Leon's personal life after RE6. Capcom has been deliberately vague about that period. We know he continues working as a government agent and appears in later stories like Death Island and Infinite Darkness, but large parts of his personal life remain unexplored. That leaves plenty of room for speculation about what his relationships might look like in the present timeline. Shipping culture and the fandom, those things are real and need to be addressed. Of course, the Resident Evil community has its own shipping culture. Some fans support Leon and Ada, others Leon and Claire, and sometimes the discussion turns into memes, like the famous continuation of the Redfield bloodline, a joke involving Chris trying to set up Claire and Leon. Those moments are part of the fun of the fandom. But if we look at the series from a lore perspective, the most realistic long-term pairing might actually be the one that gets talked about less often. In conclusion, when you remove the memes and look at the story logically, the candidates start narrowing down quickly. Ada is too morally ambiguous. Ashley doesn't match Leon's personality. Helena and Hannigan feel more like professional allies. But Sherry Birkin checks almost every box. Shared history, similar career path, decades of familiarity, compatible personality. If Leon Kennedy were ever to marry someone within the Residentverse, Sherry is arguably the most realistic candidate. But that's just one interpretation of it. Resident Evil has always left room for speculation, and the community has plenty of different theories. So now I want to hear your opinion. What do you think would realistically end up with Leon? Who do you think would realistically end up with Leon? Ada, Claire, Sherry, someone else entirely? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed deep Resident Evil analysis, lore, discussions, and speculation like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because we're going to be breaking down a lot more topics like this in the future videos. In future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.